In Africa, the Sahel region is considered a hotspot of climate change. What this means is that the temperatures have been rising steadily for the past several years, with changes in rainfall patterns and an increased intensity of droughts. Besides the impacts of climate change, the region is also characterized by varied social, economical, and political dynamics. First, the socio-economical context is characterized by a high population growth rate and a high dependency of population on agriculture. Then, the political context is characterized by a lack of governance, a rise of extremism, and the marginalization of some social groups. The problem is that as temperature rises, the pressure on already limited natural resources also tends to increase, and this has a tendency to fuel into existing tensions and conflict. This dynamic is illustrated through the current conflict occurring between farmers and herders around the Lake Chad. Well, for some years now, researchers have been investigating the origins. For some, climate change and environmental degradation are considered as the main drivers. But for others, social and political factors also ought to be taken into account. And for those, climate change is rather considered as a risk multiplier. In the Sahel, livestock is in majority raised through the practice of transhumance. So what's happening is that herders travel north during the rainy season and then they go south to allow the herds to graze on other lands. Those lands are occupied by sedentary farmers who grow crops. And what's happening is that when they used to go, those lands would have already been harvested and they were used to fertilize the land, basically. But what's happening now with climate change impacts is that herders have to go for longer distances and spend a longer amount of time in those southern lands. And as a result, the competition for land increases between farmers and herders, as both needed the one to grow crops and the other to allow the herds to graze the land. So if you mix this with the social, political, economical dynamics I described earlier, well, yes, there's a tendency for an escalation of tensions into conflict, and this is what actually is happening now. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't look that bright, first because of the complexity of the region I described earlier, and then because climate change is currently worsening. Climate change impacts are increasing and their intensity too. So basically, what's important to understand is that we all know that climate change is a challenge. We're all trying to fight it and to lessen the impacts that we have. But the problem is that climate change impacts that are currently occurring, well, they interact with other factors and sometimes they can exacerbate existing tensions, and this is what we see around the Lake Chad. So if there's one thing to understand and to keep in mind is that the more temperature rises, the more our emissions continue to rise, well, the worse will be the impacts. So what we can say is that limiting temperature rise is really a prerequisite for stability in this region.